with the superintendent or among themselves.
Yeah, I do have some questions. I want to move on this because I think it's important. I think maybe the timeline might be a little quick, only because I think that, and I'm sure you're aware of a report that came out, I think, by the St. Louis Development Corporation on the Economic Development Strategy Framework, where they talked about some goals they had, like increasing our population to 30,000 within the city by 2030, exceed the national growth rate in jobs, and not once in this report was the St. Louis Public Schools mentioned. And in the report, they did talk about the decrease in population and where that decrease mainly came from, which was North St. Louis, which of course these school closings will affect it. But what was most amazing about why people left North St. Louis was because things that we're all aware of, but as a city, we're not doing anything about it. For instance, jobs aren't there. Housing that have growth value to them aren't there. Houses that, little bungalows in South St. Louis with 3 bedrooms are valued at significantly more than that exact same bungalow on a different plot of land in North St. Louis. So they're leaving and they're going to other places. And while there's growth in the Central West End and South St. Louis, there's not that growth in North St. Louis. So if we don't work with the city very closely and fix some of those problems with the people who are in fact leaving, we're going to always be closing schools in the same areas. So I strongly urge the district to work closely with the city to ensure that they're in with our plan, and they're going to add some resources, some dollars to make sure that we're not, creating an additional bias against those areas that suffer the most. I think that, we should have, when we present this school closing plan, we should have more of a solid plan than just a repurposing plan, but more of some more solid ideas of how we would repurpose those schools. I go to a trainer who runs his gym out in a school in Jennings, a repurposed school that was repurposed for community development, and now BJC is putting a health clinic in that same building. I think we have to have some ideas of what we're going to do, so in our communications, we don't have to have ideas for all schools, but we should have a broad idea of what some of these things are going to look like. And we need a commitment from our city government leaders that they are going to be behind us and help us, because I don't see how a school district grows if the city's not including us in their development plan and they're not talking regularly with our school district about how everything that happens in our city impacts the school system. We're going to have a hard time getting people to come, increasing our population by 30,000 if our schools aren't improved. And we're not going to, I don't know if we can improve schools simply by closing them and not have the city be a partner with us, and not just a passive partner, but a very active partner with us. And so I would ask that we sit down with the city leaders and include them in this school closing plan and get some commitments to them on repurposing buildings, get some commitments from them on developing jobs in North St. Louis, get some commitments from them on improving housing conditions in North St. Louis, because our district is 75% black. A good portion of those people live in North St. Louis, and unless we do something there, I think we're just going to be having this problem continuously, and parents are going to be frustrated. People in the community who are going to be frustrated. And so I ask us just maybe slow it down just a little bit and get the city involved in this, because they owe us that commitment as a school system.
So, Board Member Fowler, we have been at the table with the city for the last 3 or 4 years on this topic. This is not the initial time that this has occurred. We've met with the city planning department multiple times. The board president also had a conversation with myself, with the mayor 2 months ago relative to the same matter. So we have been at the table with the city at least in at least in this particular administration, over a period of time. The city has limited resources and limited commitment around additional resources, as you indicated, around changing the pattern of what has occurred. We've had this, I have personally had the conversation with parties in the city for the last 10 years as it relates to this issue. And the city has attempted to support the kind of efforts that we're talking about, but they have minimal resources as well. And I'm not saying they don't have a plan, they do have a plan. And in the latest meeting that we had with the city, most of the development was in South St. Louis or Central Quarter. Very little was in North St. Louis. And so that's just the reality of those meetings. And they've been very, very supportive of talking to us and meeting with us and looking at what we're doing. And we've sat down with them on a continuous basis. As a matter of fact, some schools in North St. Louis did not close the last time we had this conversation because they were looking at NGA coming in that area. And we were looking at schools in that area. We backed off on certain schools, closing those schools because of NGA possibly coming. And obviously it's here now. And so part of the conversation that we're going to have with the city and with this board is where development is coming from, the information we have from the city. They do have a 2, 3, 4-year plan around what they're looking at, how many building permits have come out, and all of those kinds of things. So I will strongly support the notion of us meeting with them again and bringing back all of the data relative to what the city is saying, and that has and will impact any recommendation we make to you. That is indicator number 4. If you look at here, this notion of potential for neighborhood collaboration. That's where that fits, and that's what we are looking to get feedback from the city or anyone else relative to this space.
I guess for me, I just am looking for something stronger because to me, I find it amazing that we could have such a strong report that comes out of the city, the St. Louis Development Corporation, of all the things we hope to do, and the city schools are not included. So, and I understand conversations. I think we have to push for a documented commitment, because this study, took place with a lot of people involved, resources, and they could come up with a plan that does not mention the school system. For me, as a reader of the plan, I have to ask, how serious is our city about our school system? Because these are talking about many of the things that are in this plan, but without the city's commitment and participation in this on a real level, on a documented level, that shows commitment, I'm concerned that I don't want, lip service from the city, and then we're struggling trying to make it better on our own. Because this plan that they put together, to me, indicates that maybe they didn't, either it was an oversight to consider the schools and we need to go back and say, hey, you need to incorporate the school system, or there's not a real commitment to help the school system improve. And I don't know how a city improves if the school system doesn't improve. So I do recommend that we go back to the city and really ask, incorporate what they're going to do in the school closing plan.
Yes, ma'am.
I would say, Dr. Fowler, I agree with you. And I don't think our city leadership does have a concerted approach to education in our city. I feel like we have a mayor that feels powerless when it comes to education, that she doesn't have any control or direction on the future of education in the city, and that's sad. We have a standing committee at the Board of Aldermen on Education and Youth Matters, and they had one meeting a while ago, a year ago, and that's unacceptable. And if they have an issue with that, have another meeting. But honestly, our city officials I haven't seen a concerted effort to stress the importance of education. You're absolutely right. If we're not talking about where schools are and how many students we have in schools, how are we talking about increasing our school populations? And to your point, Dr. Adams, I know you're not talking about, just Northside schools are closing, but the reality is that Northside schools have closed before, and Northside schools are probably up for the conversation when we look at things like enrollment demand. And again, going to your point, Dr. Fowler, if we're closing schools on the north side and they're planning on building buildings, and houses and housing development, who's going to move into a neighborhood that doesn't have a school? So that clearly is not a solid plan if that's the Development Corp's plan right now, if they plan on bringing people into areas with no schools. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a failure on our city leadership's part. And I don't know what else we have to do that. I don't know what the fruit of the conversation was, Dr. Adams, between you, the board president, and city leadership. But that's just something that's not very visible. I wish it were more visible. And clearly it's not it's a clear slap in the face to the education system of SLPS if it's not even in the plan.
Anyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You can go ahead.
I am just wondering, 2/3 of the city budget is for police, and we are seriously underfunded in education. I'm wondering if the city is under-resourced, if there might be any push toward getting them to reallocate some of that budget to services that people need in the community. We're always talking about adding social workers to schools full-time, adding school nurses, but perhaps if there were some community health centers or something to that degree, we wouldn't need so many police and the schools wouldn't be taxed with that responsibility. So if there is a conversation that goes back to the mayor, I would like to see that question asked.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to kind of follow up as well, and I agree with everything that has been said up until now. But for me, we're holding our student population hostage based on what the mayor is and is not doing, what the aldermen are doing and not doing. And so if we want to move forward and provide a quality education for the students that we service, then we'll have to make some tough decisions. If there are no students in North St. Louis, they're not there because their parents or their caregivers have made a decision that North St. Louis is not accommodating to their families, be that jobs, housing, etc. And so it comes back to what we will do as a board to fully service the children in our charge right now. And for me, we have to look at getting as many resources as we possibly can get so that we can give them what they need to thrive and survive and be competitive. And that lends itself to closing schools. It's a tough decision, but we have as much information as we can possibly get. There's only so much that we can control. We can't rely on the mayor and the aldermen, but we can certainly encourage our parents who vote on those specific offices to put people in place who support schools. And that's something anyone who lives in the city of St. Louis can do if they're educated around it, and if they know that we have the best interests of their children at heart in doing it. We include them in the planning process and the selection process so that it's a win-win for everyone. We need to move forward. We don't have any more time to delay waiting on someone else to solve this problem.
I can
I'd like
appreciate.
to speak to this, please. Thanks.
Ms. Jones?
Okay, so this is something that I have spoken to many times over the years to our board and to you, Dr. Adams, as it relates to our relationship with city officials as well as the constituents in our community. And that was one of the biggest reasons why there was a heavy push for an elected board to be back in place, so that there was some type of accountability and transparency as it relates to leadership in this city and making decisions. And so with that being said, I think that I'm going to go back to the presentation that was made by Dr. Clancy. And the first sentence, one of the sentences that she said was that the quality of life in any community is dependent upon the performance of the public schools. And so one question that popped in my head when she said that was, why haven't the schools done well? And so when we talk about the schools in our community, I've always said that the board doesn't carry the entire burden. Yes, we are put in this specific capacity to make decisions as it relates to policies and other, decisions around education, but in order for us to get as many resources as we can get, it causes us to have partnerships with the community. It means that we have to have these partnerships with other elected officials and people in our community. And so when we look at the different graphs and the information that has been submitted before the board tonight, we do know that many people leave North St. Louis because of the crime, because of the housing, because of the food deserts, because of the schools that are in the area. I'm from Wanda Park, so I see it all the time, and we do know that these things happen by design. They happen by design, and then things like this happen right now where we have to have the decision to close the school. And so I don't believe in the statement that says we don't have time to, consider these things. Now, when I talk to our city officials about the specific issues happening with SLPS, many of them just don't even know what's going on. And so some of the solutions, which I think we should be solution-based at this time, is that we need to be strategic about when they have their ward meetings, there should be an SLPS rep at every single meeting to talk about what is happening. Yes, it is an extra step, but if that means that we're going to reach more people, then so be it. When churches have, they're reading their agenda, perhaps we have somebody on it there to talk about what's happening in this specific area with this school that's by this church. We all have a responsibility in our different capacities to inform the people that we are engaging with.
I'd like to say something about school closures because it has affected me a great deal. Back in 2004, I believe I was working for the St. Louis Lead Prevention Coalition, and they were working very closely with the city of St. Louis, and I saw that organization along with the city officials strategically help destroy North St. Louis. They were going into homes and giving violations to people that didn't really deserve it so that they could take their property. And to me, this has always been about removing black and brown people from North St. Louis. And this has never been about building up the schools. This has always been about the land grab that was going to happen, and it's happening now. And we're all suffering as a result of it. I'm really disappointed because I've been looking at a school in my area, I'm so upset. The high school in my area, Susan, the high school?
Northwest High School?
Northwest High School. And when I went to Northwest High School, there was nothing going on in my neighborhood. And there still isn't anything going on in my neighborhood. And so we have neglected to put programs in that are beneficial toward our students. We have had wonderful educators in St. Louis Public School. We have people that are very dedicated and love our students. But we have had an administration that has put into place Team 4 over the decades to destroy North St. Louis so they can come in and get that land and get us out of there. And that's what's happening now. And that's why I want to know, just closing schools, I understand that we need to think about saving money and that kind of thing, but we need to have a plan because I'm sick and tired of looking at Walnut Park School sitting down there dead and no use at all. I asked if we could perhaps, if the school is no longer usable, to tear the school down if you have to, and keep the land until we can do better, or use it for solar energy or wind power so that we can make money to build new schools. Because if we can build a soccer stadium, if we can build a football stadium, surely we can put up the best schools for our students and our staff, because they don't have it. Right now, we're still laboring in old buildings that have poor ventilation systems, and our staff and our students deserve so much more than that, and they deserve to be paid more than that. And so what I'm saying is that the city, we have a mayoral race coming up next year, and I'm really hoping people will look at that, because I, as a city taxpayer, am sick and tired of paying taxes and not getting my money's worth. It really does upset me. I'm sick and tired of our children not getting what they deserve and seeing closed buildings. So I just have to just say, we need a plan. We need a plan because our children deserve brand new schools. Our staff deserves brand new schools that have programs in them that help them further their education. We need trade schools. We need all of that, and we have not gotten it. And the reason why people are leaving because they have not been able to get the kind of programs that they need. We send all that money from the DSEG program out there to build up county schools, and they have wonderful schools, and they've been able to maintain their neighborhoods. While in my neighborhood, it's in the morning, there's no one driving to work hardly. There's nothing going on, so that's why. And I'm really sick of just letting elected officials get by with destroying us on purpose and coming in and buying up our schools for the same amount of money that you would pay for a house. And that's what I've looked at on the real estate committee. They're paying the same amount of money for a house that they would for a school. And then they're smiling all the way to the bank while many of our residents have suffered and lost their property in real estate court. So that's the way I feel about that.
Just want to make one final comment. And I'm not against the proposed criteria. I actually think it's great. The new criteria that's set is actually the criteria we should use. What I'm suggesting is that if we don't work closely with the city and get a commitment to them to, make some of these schools community centers that they are helping to fund, to have LRA assist us in doing something more with these schools, or maybe demolishing them but allowing us to keep the land so that we don't have to go through the cost of demolishing them. Get some commitment from them first so that we can communicate that to the community so they can understand there's more than just getting rid of schools, but hey, there are some other thoughts. We know what else we're going to do with some of these buildings, and get that commitment from the city to help us. And then I'm just saying slow it down for a little while. I'm not saying slow it down a year or anything like that, but let's work on that commitment and then use the criteria, the revised criteria, because I think it is really good. But what we don't want to do is close schools in areas where there's a real potential to do something different. Just like we waited on the NGA. If there are some commitments we could get from the city to say, hey, we're going to do something fantastic in Walnut Park where I go to church. If we can get some commitment, and I've worked with the alderperson in that district, and they're having the same conversations that you guys are saying about their area. So what I want is a commitment from the city to help us come up with some plans for some of these, for that land, some of these buildings, and if in fact we have to close them and maybe tear some down, LRA does the tearing down, not us. We don't pay for that. But get some kind of commitment so that when we roll this out to our community, we also roll out some solid plans on things that are going to be to the benefit of the community as we do this, in addition to the improvement in education. But what about an improvement to the communities that these schools were in? And I think this is something, to me, that is of an urgency. So this is not something we wait on. We do it quickly so that we can continue with the school closing plan at a reasonable pace. So I'm not suggesting not doing it. I'm just suggesting doing it with more meat behind it. And that meat, I think, can come from the city's commitment to our communities and our students and parents.
So I very much appreciate all of the passion that I'm hearing from the board, as this is probably, aside from the pandemic, the most important decision that any board could make, and certainly to be making in this time is really important. And deserves our full thought. To me, looking at this comparison between the original criteria and the proposed criteria reflects some of these values that I'm hearing from the board. So, for example, I so very much appreciate the removal of academic performance from the criteria altogether, because as we all know, and I'm hearing from you all tonight, so much of that academic performance is a direct result of these systemic inequalities and racism that the city has put out for the city for so long. So removing that is, in my mind, an acknowledgement of the outcomes that we're seeing are a result of this inequality and racism that has been so pervasive in the city. I do also see this proposed criteria as a real opportunity for us to I guess, reinvest in our student outcomes, and also to demonstrate a renewed commitment to the community and to our families. So I very, very much agree with you, Dr. Roberts, that out of all of these things that we're talking about tonight, the only thing that we actually can control on this board is student outcomes and our allocation and commitment and resources to students, because the students who are here now, we have an obligation and a duty and an honor to serve in the best way that we can. School closures, unfortunately, is part of that conversation because of all of the things we're saying, for sure. But we can't allow the students that are here now to suffer in perpetuity because we're waiting on students that may or may not come from a city that may or may not care about us as a district. So while these extended conversations with the city are extremely important, and I would encourage them to happen, I don't think we can slow down this process based on entities that we can't control and entities who have not shown an interest in our district so far, because that really would really demonstrate an injustice to the students that we currently have. So I think, beyond all of those things, this timeline is also aligned to the decision-making, I guess, timeline of the district. So as we all know, the bulk of contracts and decisions for the following school year really come in that February through March timeline. So if we don't know how many buildings we're going to have, I don't know how we could possibly enter into contracts and negotiate those things in good faith. So, it's an interesting time to be talking about this, but there are some considerations as far as district governance goes that we really need to make sure that we're involving in this conversation. And it is hard. I agree. Again, Dr. Roberts, this is really difficult. It's hard to hear. It's hard to recognize that we are the decision-making entity for this. But looking at those things that are within our locus of control, I think, is really important. And we need to really consider those criteria and how they're affecting the students that we currently have.
I'd like to add that one of the things we control is effort, the effort we put forth in making changes. And what I'm suggesting is that we put forth an effort to get the city involved and make some commitments quickly so that as we're closing these schools, we make the right choices. One thing I learned in business is that when things are important, you do it quickly, you do it firmly, and you try to get commitments before you make, decisions that are going to have a long-term impact. So we can actually choose to put forth a all-out effort to get the city more committed to our communities, without knowing every detail of what they're going to do. But if we could get a commitment, they understand the passion, they understand our concerns, and we could get commitment that, yeah, LRA is going to assist us in if we have to close, if we're going to have to demolish a building. Yeah, we are going to be behind you in creating community centers for some of these areas, more depressed areas, and get that done quickly. Then we have something to say as we close these schools. This is not something I'm suggesting we put off, in the next 6 months. We just shouldn't move that slowly. We should move quickly, extremely quickly. And I think successful organizations tend to move very quickly when you have matters of importance like this and decisions to make, like we're being asked to make.
And thank you for sharing that. I feel the energy that you have in that. But let me just kind of share some context. When I decided to run for the board, it was brand new. I didn't really know what I was doing. But after I won, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to talk to the mayor of the city to see where our mayor stood in terms of public education. And it took me 1 year to have that conversation. So it was the inaction that said to me about a commitment to public education. I also decided to go to the Board of Aldermen and just hear the conversations that were going on, impacting the lives of the voters and their families, the students that we serve, and recommended that every ward bring in a conversation around education. And we have, 27, 28 wards, and so that was a recommendation that I made as well. Additionally, we have our elected officials, and they work very, very hard, but we also have all these giveaways. We have TIFs and abatements that just fly off the shelves, and there's no connection to public schools around that. Just think if just a fraction of the money that they give away in TIFs and abatements was given to the school district around a building fund, that would help us upgrade buildings, that would help us secure buildings, that would help us do a number of things that our kids are so deserving of. And so I respect, all of the conversation that we're having. I'm just sharing with you a lived experience.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, and I appreciate that. I did have a question. I don't know if this is directed to the superintendent of the board. I guess it's just all of us that are here. So in the video, and I appreciate you playing that, Dr. Adams, the Ford through Ferguson video, you could see at the Northern River, there were 2 signs on the side that said, conserve water, right? And of course, we saw the video, so we understand the implications of that. So I guess my question to all of us is, how do we ensure that this decision, whatever it may be, and current and future decisions that we make are decisions that are having us look upstream as opposed to dealing with where we are? Because when I hear what Donna and Susan are saying, it's we are connected, and we can't continue to operate in this downstream mentality because we'll just stay downstream. So I hear what you're saying, Dorothy, about we have to do what we have to do for students right now and where we are now. But of course, where we are now is a factor of us being on the northern side of the river and being downstream. So I guess my question is just, how do we continue to push that urgency around looking upstream? If that's the video that we watched, and if that's my biggest takeaway, is how do we look upstream? Because, and we see the implications play out on a monthly basis. Ms. Banks gave us a presentation 2 weeks ago telling us that there was PPE funding, that a grant that we were approved for, but can no longer get the funds because the city already spent all the money that it was gifted. So these do have strong implications, and of course it's a pandemic, so this is a particular case, but we can't ignore how intertwined this is. And again, going back to this plan, if we're talking about development, and our role as governors here is to make sure that we ensure the success and growth of this district, the development of this district, we can't ignore the fact that we sit in a city. We are not isolated from it. We are not in a bubble. We are part of the city, and we are in the city, and whatever the city does, we bear the effects of it because, again, we are downstream of whatever happens in the city. So my urge is just to continue to think and make sure that the decisions that we make and how we think are where we are thinking, looking upstream, as opposed to just making decisions based on where we are downstream.
So, Mr. Lang, your comments are 100% appropriate, because in anticipation of what I thought the board would say, I kind of thought about the same thing and have a response, and I think it's an appropriate response, and not a negative response, but to give context to what you're saying. The question becomes, why aren't we fighting that fight instead of closing schools? City, state, and federal officials are ignoring our community needs. The school district needs to keep schools open and fight for more resources. That's a real criticism, and I think it's real. We recognize the presence of systemic racism as part of the cause of an equitable distribution of resources that plague our community. Therefore, we are committed to advocating for our families and our communities in the following ways. And I think the board is going to take up one of those things tonight. Progressive legislative agenda, community partnerships, as Ms. Jones has already indicated, alliance with other school districts with similar resource issues, including rural districts as well, because this is not just a city issue, it's an issue across the entire country and in Missouri as well. Districts are closing everywhere, not just in St. Louis City or schools. Partnering with local and regional developers, similar to what Board Member Fowler said. Partnering with grassroots organizations with a demonstrated commitment to our families and communities. However, as we engage in that long-term strategy, we also have to optimize the use of our current resources today, similar to what the President said. We are committed to today. Yes, we could think about the future, and I think we do both at the same time, but we can't stop dealing with the reality of what we have right now. An elementary school with 97 kids makes it almost incredibly impossible to support those kids in that building. It's impossible. It's literally impossible to do so in an equitable way. So yes, I agree with Mr. Lane 100%. I think the board can do an A and a B. A, look at the present issue before us, but B, commit itself along with administration to fight for the additional resources that the river talked about. We have to continue, we have to get a stream similar to what's in the North, the North River, to really address this 100%. This is a short-term solution. This is not a long-term solution, because unless there are equal dollars coming to the district in a way that we saw on the north side, then we will continue to have this problem, Mr. Lang and board, not next year and 5 years from now. We'll fix it short-term, but long-term, the next superintendent will be standing here, new board members sitting here, talking about the same thing 5 or 10 years from now, unless we advocate in a different kind of way to get increased resources long-term for this particular district. This is a stopgap measure, and I just want to be clear about it. Short-term to address the current and present issue before us. But long-term, as Mrs. Jones indicated, there's a long-term effort to do something uniquely different in North St. Louis and South St. Louis. There's no ifs and buts about it. But only the board, political people who are sitting at this table can advocate in a different kind of way to get resources from the city, from the state, from the federal government to try to equalize the resources that are coming in, the dollars that are coming in. To try to equalize this river issue that I think that this particular entity, Ferguson Forreston, did an excellent job of articulating that. We have, and I'll shut up after this, we have 12 high schools. Only 2 or 3 offer calculus. Only 2 or 3. Why? Because the populations are so small and it's difficult finding calculus teachers. Less schools mean greater opportunities for kids to get the resources that you want them to have, that in some cases are already there, but are being leveraged differently because the populations are so small. So I'll shut up with that, board members.
Dr. Adams, I appreciate what you said, and I appreciate that you had an answer. I would ask that, when we go to vote on these criteria that are set here, that if during that time you could also present us with a document of the B plan so that we can have both of them in hand and communicate both of them, I think that would be better. Because I agree with you, we have to advocate for something better for the future of our city and our city students. Even though we may have to do some of these, we still have to have that plan that we can communicate that in addition to this, we have a plan to, advocate for more from our city, our state, our business leaders, et cetera, to improve our schools. So I appreciate that you had a response.
Dr. Adams, I'd like to know if you can provide a list of the potential schools that you're speaking of, because I know when you started your presentation, you said that it might not be a good idea, but for me, I don't know about the other board members, but I'd like to go by those schools. I'd like to look. I'd like to examine the history. I'd like to really take a look at each piece of each school that you're speaking of, because that's important to me.
So I have not identified any schools, as I said before earlier, until the board says this is the criteria to use, because we haven't and I'll be totally candid and honest, we have not put a name of a school in a piece of paper intentionally, because I wanted the board to say, yes, this is a criteria, we'll take this criteria, we'll go back, we'll score schools based on this criteria, and then we'll come back at the next board meeting and provide that to you. That was the intent of coming back on the 10th to do that. If the board feels comfortable with this criteria, and then no, and I think quietly I hear that, then then we will move forward over the next 2 weeks to do that. And to your point, board member Fowler, we will engage the city aggressively over the next 2 weeks while we do that. Well, again, we've been at the table with them, but we have not been at the table with them, quite frankly, since the pandemic occurred. We did a lot of work on the front end, but since March and the pandemic, everyone has been really just trying to address the issues that are clear and present dangers in front of them. But we will re-engage back with the Community Development Agency, with the city and LRA, and Mr. Casey is on that committee. So we can get to Otis Williams in a second to discuss with him all of the details, and we've done that before.
Dr. I just have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
How do we aggressively do that, engage our community leaders? What does that look like for you?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, they have to be committed to wanting to see what's best for kids. And I think we have to gauge that based upon not only what they say, but what they do. We have been incredibly engaged with a number of different aldermen and obviously the president of the board and other persons as well. But I think some of you said it really, really well. And I want to try to be as honest as I can. I think with there being 27 aldermen, some don't have schools in their district. And so there's not even a level of commitment around what happens to schools because they don't have any schools that they support. And so they have minimal involvement around what happens in that particular ward because they're not concerned about necessarily the ward that's next to them. I think they have an overall general concern like I would or you would, but not in a real intimate way. I think to answer your question long and short, I think we have to confront them. We have to have some conversations with them and ask them what their level of commitment around certain things. There was a ward meeting I want to say this week or late last week, with one of the alderpersons who had all of the principals on the phone for their particular ward, and the alderperson was basically indicating, I cannot have any schools closed in my ward, and they have 4 or 5 schools in their ward, but the numbers of kids in those buildings are less than 150. And so they realize how important schools are, but they have minimal resources to try to impact that. And that's just the reality. Every time I talk to a ward person, they don't have a lot of resources, Ms. Jones, to really leverage this issue. They get, I don't know how much they actually get, but they don't get a ton of money to try to make an impact, and they're dealing with streets, they're dealing with houses that are dilapidated, and then you add schools to that, and then it's a big, big challenge. And Dr. Roberts kind of spoke to it, but there's a real challenge in the wards in terms of the power that all the people have in terms of influencing some things.
So thank you for your response, Dr. Adams. I'm not sure if you remember, and Dorothy, I sent this to you guys a while back. I did an analysis of the schools when there was a proposed list of schools, or I did an analysis of the city of St. Louis and our areas that had, high crime rates, very low employment, of course, there are the food deserts that had businesses, churches. I did everything in a document, and basically, after I did that, I sent that to you guys. So what it showed me was that those areas that had those high crime rates, that were food deserts, that I'm trying to get my thoughts together, that were facing these specific issues that make people move out of the area, were the areas that we have the lowest amount of students inside of those schools. And so strategically moving forward, I think it would make sense for us to have conversations with people that are in the 3rd ward, people that are in the 21st ward, people that are in the 27th ward, people that, those alder people, those the state reps, the committee people that are in those specific areas. We target those people first because we know that those are problem areas in the city of St. Louis. And then the other areas come after that because we know where there's a real need at for SOPS. And perhaps even if the alder people or the committee people or whomever in that area are not getting the resources that they need, do we have extra resources or partnerships that will be willing to support those areas in an extra way because they need that push, they need those resources to keep these schools afloat or to get more people or kids inside of the schools?
Obviously the board has put a number of things on the table. We will go back tomorrow in the next couple of days to try to leverage all of the things that the board said and provide the board with an update ASAP.
So I have a couple more thoughts that I want to make sure that we consider as we move into this next phase. So as I've already said, I agree with all of you and appreciate so much your passion about these systemic issues. But we're spending a lot of time talking about outside political forces and very little time talking about students and teachers and staff. So you all know, I think, that I taught at Northwest for 6 years, and I taught science. And by the end of my time at Northwest, I was teaching 5 different science preps, because it was important to me that we are able to offer those things to our students. But we were a very small school that had difficulty allocating resources, in much of the same way that we're talking about tonight. So there is a direct impact on students and on staff. We talk a lot about burnout. We talk a lot about teacher job satisfaction. Teaching 5 science preps, 2 of which were AP, in a school with little resources and a science lab that I literally cleaned out myself, I would say led to my burnout. And I am sure that there are other teachers in the district that are feeling the same way. So yes, all of these political things are very, very true and very real and long-term, absolutely need to be addressed. But we are sacrificing the people that are currently being served by this district because we're not looking at the reality that we have now. So both of these things are true, both of these things are important, but our responsibility here is to make sure that our students and our staff are well and healthy and receiving a good education. And we cannot do that in buildings that have 97 kids or 100 kids. Like you indicated, Dr. Adams, with calculus, I think that's true in a lot of this advanced coursework that we very much want to offer. So after I left the district, I taught for a test prep organization, and I had the opportunity to teach courses out of a number of schools, county schools, private schools. That difference of what they are being provided and we are providing is extremely different. We have the opportunity to make up some of that difference by considering these hard things. Beyond that, I had the opportunity to work in Hazelwood district for a while with doing some tutoring. A district that has similar demographics to us is offering things like a television studio for students to work out of, have any number of electives that we are not able to offer. Because we have spread these resources so thin across this district, we are not providing the education that our students deserve. So these political pieces are important, but largely outside our control, at least as we sit today. And during my time on the board, I would come to SAB meetings, and I know that this school closure piece was up before the SAB a number of times. This constant revisiting of school closure is traumatic to the community at large, and so we want to make sure we're making thoughtful, informed decisions and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and providing outcomes for students. But we also have to recognize that stretching this out, we've been talking about this board has been talking about it for 12 months now. There is a level of trauma that we are imposing by dragging this out. And so I think we have to really be thoughtful and carefully balance all the aspects of this so we're able to do the job that we're here to do, which is providing that education for kids.
And Dorothy, just to add on to what you said, I would just caution you on, when you speak about people saying things, passionately and, and we need to be talking about the facts. These are facts. And until you live this life, until you walk up and down these streets in North St. Louis and have to pass this stuff up every single day, then you really can't speak directly to what these people are really going through. And so when we talk about, us hurrying up this process and we're leaving these kids behind, then there needs to be some type of analysis of what resources that they need right now in those specific schools. Because a lot of them are saying that they're not getting what they need right now, this week, today, and as of last year. So what is it on a transparent level that we can see from each school that they were needing that they did not get that's going to hinder them from doing better in their education, more importantly?
And if we're talking about generational impact, because these decisions are going to affect generations, 12 months, less than 12 months of conversation to compare to 18 years of education, I feel like those don't even compare personally. Now, if you want to get more strategic with our conversation, that's fine, but I think if we're just comparing lengths of time, we can compare 12 months to a generation of outcomes. We can compare 12 months to a transformation plan or development plan for the city that doesn't include the future of St. Louis education. We can compare a lot of things if we're just looking at time.
And I agree. And so I think if this is something that the board feels is not the right time, I think we owe it to this district to say that now.
I think it's not. I think it is time to consider it. I'm just saying we need to consider this along with other considerations. Don't exclude one so that we could do the other. I'm saying do both and do it as a matter of urgency. There is no waiting till COVID ends for us to go back to the mayor and the city and say we need some commitment. I mean, everything's blamed on COVID, I understand, but this is too urgent for us to say we need to wait on having these conversations to get some kind of commitment that they're going to work with us moving forward. So, people just don't wait for stuff. Maybe, we don't have to wait on these things. And I'm saying do both and do both with a sense of urgency so that we don't ignore one part of the conversation just so that we could get through this part. As an organization, we have and as a board, we have a responsibility to consider all factors, including those generational factors that have existed forever. And then I have one comment and one question. I would encourage, and I sat in on the Forward through Ferguson presentations, the short version that you saw not tonight and the long one. I would encourage everybody, parents, teachers, who's ever listening, all the board members to go read their report, because that report is so enlightening. It tells a story that says that these systemic issues that have been occurring has impacted North St. Louis and other depressed areas so greatly. And a lot of times, decisions were made without understanding the systematic pressures that were on these areas. So I really encourage everybody to go and read the report. It is amazing. And when I was in on the meeting, I asked them if they had read the St. Louis Development Corp's report. And when I talked about some of the things that were in it, they were astounded that that report was out there and they didn't know about it. So I encourage everybody to read it. But the question I have is, number 5, what does that mean? I don't even know what other special program considerations mean.
So we have 2 schools that are part of the CPN. Those are 2 special programs at Ashland and Merrimack. That might be a special program at CSMB, which is a medical kind of high school. So that would be the kind of special programs we're talking about. Some schools might be SIG, get additional funds for school improvement. So those will be, we would have to define what the special programs are.
I guess maybe for consideration, we could add maybe a 6th criteria. That being if a school is situated in such a way that it could be used for other community purposes, And so if we are considering a school that meets all 5 of these things, or at least 4 of those things, but that school would be a great, that school has the potential to be something else in that community that will be extremely beneficial to that community. We have that on the table so we can know.
That will be our number 4. That will be part of number 4 as well.
That will be part of 4. Okay,
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
good. Okay,
Yes,
great.
ma'am.
Thank you
Yes,
very
ma'am.
much.
I'd just like to add a few more points. I was responsible for running a school in North St. Louis, a school that was under-resourced. The monies that come to the school follow the child, and so your budget is built on how many students you have in that building. And so if the budget that you receive is not enough to provide children with what they need, then as the building leader, you go out and you seek and find those resources, okay? We were a high-performing school, but we didn't have access to technology, and the district wasn't providing that. And so it was incumbent upon me as the building leader to seek out those additional resources. So we really have to frame it around the fact that budgets are allocated on the number of students in the building. And so if you have, what did you say, 100 kids in the building, then your budget is predicated on those 100 students. And so if you're looking to do something extraordinary, it may not fall within the confines of your budget. And so I'm not saying to haphazardly close schools. I'm saying to be strategic in that so that we can indeed provide the quality education and the equity and all the stuff that we talk about, and try to minimize the kinds of injustices that our boys and girls are suffering and will continue to suffer in a world that's not really designed for their success. So we have an opportunity to make a difference. The decision may be a very hard one, but it's one that is made in the best interest of the kids we serve.
Back to number 2 under the proposed criteria, which is the building conditions. And like many other board members have mentioned, I too live in North St. Louis, and the conditions here are a lot different than particularly some of our magnet schools. I would really like to see a cost benefit analysis, or a timeline even, for what it would cost to have new buildings in place of those old buildings when compared to the maintenance of the buildings that are in the worst condition. Maybe that means most expensive to maintain. Maybe that means the building that's been the longest since it's gotten any upgrades. But I know that St. Louis is very attached to our historic buildings, but we can't continue to put that attachment ahead of our kids' needs. So when we have schools that are in need of better ventilation, better wiring, better technology access, I think that it would be unfair for us to not consider what new buildings would cost when factoring this in. And I believe, Dr. Adams, that you mentioned this several months ago when we had this conversation initially, that some of these buildings are just cost prohibitive to maintain. So I would really appreciate that. I think that is a good thing to have moved up to number 2 when we talk about equity and when we talk about a racial equity lens, north side versus south side, et cetera. I'm not sure if that's something that could be done or exactly what that data would look like, what data points would be collected, but that's just something that I'm thinking about that may be able to address some of the inequities, at least guide our decisions in that.
We can provide something close enough to that for the board. We can provide something close enough to that for the board. We can do that.
Thank you.
Dr. Adams, it seems like members of the board are, I guess, more in favor of the proposed criteria than the original. Can you give us an idea of when we could expect the weights for each category?
My intent is to have them to you by Friday. We discussed them today at length in my meeting on yesterday, was it today? What today is? I think it was today. We did, and we came up with some categories and weights as well, but I want to hear from the board first before we went any further. So no later than Friday, as early as tomorrow. I want to thank the board for engaging tonight. I really appreciate your thoughtful dialogue between each other, among each other, and between myself as well and administration, because I know they're listening as well. But I just want to thank the board for your comments and your concerns, and we will aggressively, as Ms. Fowler said, look to try to engage in ways that we can to bring back some information to the board on a December the 10th date. Not hearing any vote or anything else, I'm going to move forward with November 10th. And obviously, if the board wants to push anything back, they always have the flexibility to do that. So I want to thank the board. I have one more update, and it's not a presentation. Just want to quickly talk about Restart. I want to indicate that we started with pre-K through grades 6 over the last 2 weeks. And just to give you some idea, we have 11,222 students enrolled in elementary schools. 6,500 indicated that they were coming to in person. Of that number, about 4,700 have actually shown up. So that represents about 72% of the kids who say they will come into in-person are there. And all of our elementary schools, that represents about 42% of the actual population of elementary schools. We're looking to do the same thing with middle schools on 11/9. That's on 11/9 for middle schools, and then high schools in a very limited way on 11/30. I know there's been a great deal of concern about the transmission rate and those kinds of things. I provided to you a City of St. Louis chart that lists what the number of kids in the City of St. Louis who've come down with the virus. That number is a max of 360 kids in the entire city that have had the virus. That number is higher for high schools, 181, and that means that we have probably about 50,000 elementary kids, 50,000 school-age kids in the City of St. Louis are getting education, public, private, and those who go to the county. But the numbers are about 300 cases of kids that have come down with the virus altogether. And so I just kind of want to frame that represents about 0.04 kids in the City of St. Louis who've had the virus so far. And obviously, a lot of the charter schools and public schools were not in place, although the Catholic schools have been in place since the beginning of the pandemic. So I just wanted to give the board some context around that. We're surveying middle and high school families now, and about 50% have responded to the survey, and we'll determine how we move forward with that. But it looks like 11/9 for middle school and 11/30 for high schools, and I'll provide the board with an update in writing relative to that. So I just wanted to kind of cover the restart piece. In the state of Missouri, because I know people keep hearing about the rate in the state of Missouri, it's about 18%. In the city of St. Louis, it's about 5%. And so the number I looked at today from the state was about 10%, but that number fluctuates. But in the city of St. Louis, it's about a 5% rate of positivity, if you will, in the city of St. Louis, which is much, much lower than the state. But I know it's continuing to be reported around a high rate, and that rate is correct for the state of Missouri, but much, much lower for the city of St. Louis. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Jones. Dr. Roberts.
Just a couple things. Is it possible to put that document that you shared with us on the website?
Yes, ma'am.
As you go to our website and look at the COVID data dashboard, that information is not there that you just shared?
Yes, ma'am.
Nor is it on the city health department's website. And
Yes,
I think it would kind of take away the fear and the anxiety that our staffs and parents are having, because we are in an unknown, unforgiving kind of environment. So as much information as they can have would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure that's up there tomorrow.
And then I think there was an email about no voting day. Are we going to talk about that today?
Yes, I'm going to address that right now. If there are no other questions about the restart. So I am asking the board, get my document here, please. So at this point in time, there are 39 school sites that are designated polling sites for the upcoming Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020 presidential election, and obviously state and local elections as well. Per the current school calendar, St. Louis public staff are also scheduled to report to school buildings for staff professional development on November the 3rd, 2020. In light of high anticipated voter turnout and additional building maintenance requirements flowing from the current pandemic conditions, I am recommending that the board amend the 2020-21 academic calendar to eliminate the November PD date. Also, for the reasons related to COVID-19 and to give our staff some additional recovery time, I'm recommending the board amend the 2020-21 school calendar and extend the Thanksgiving holiday closure by 2 days for 10-month employees for the 23rd and 24th, which will mean that there's no school on those 2 dates, and that for central office staff, which will be 12-month employees, that they would also be extended to that 25th, which is a Wednesday, thereby closing the district and closing the district down for the entire week. It will also be my recommendation that employees' holiday pay be extended, which I just said, to eligible employees for those 2 additional days, and these days will come with persons being paid their regular salary. Are there any questions from the board members relative to that?
Yes, Dr. Adams, are you saying that November the 3rd, there will not be professional development?
That is correct. I'm recommending, right now, students don't come to school on next Tuesday. At this point in time, we were planning professional development, meaning all staff in the district will be having school-based special professional development. I'm recommending that school, because the professional development was going to take place in buildings, and we have voting taking place in those buildings as well. So I'm recommending that nobody is in our building but the voting population that is there, and schools are closed down 100%.
Okay, and so my last question is November the 4th, the day after, is there going to be some type of professional cleaning that happens, or will there be a day off as well?
That is why I'm requesting that staff, the custodians not be off, because they'll be there late that night cleaning that area. Plus, the area is going to be isolated in terms of where persons are coming in and where they're going out. I don't want to impact them further by having people in the building for professional development. They have a local area where the voting population will be coming in and out, and limit what they need to clean, with the belief that I can use all of the custodians, because 39 buildings are going to be occupied for voting, but I'll have other custodians who support them in those buildings while their buildings are shut down, such that we can do the deep cleaning and get ready for school the next day.
And I just want to clarify, and you're saying the week of Thanksgiving, that whole week will
That
be
is
off.
entire week, yes, ma'am. That is correct. We have enough days built in the calendar to accommodate not having kids in school on that day, on those 2 days.
So do we need to make a motion?
I think Dr. Roberts is going to make one, I think.
I move that I make a motion to accept the amended calendar.
Second.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Vowell?
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Natalie, if you can still hear us, I know you requested this be brought forth for a vote. If you'd like to speak about Proposition R, and then I'll entertain a motion to vote on that statement. Natalie, can you hear us?
Barely. Could you repeat that?
I said that this was your recommendation to bring this statement forward for a vote. So I'm going to give you the chance to introduce that, and then I'll entertain a motion to vote on the statement.
Okay, so I think you said we are going to vote on the statement regarding Proposition R.
Yes, so it was your recommendation that we vote on this, so I wanted to give you a chance to introduce the statement or read it into the, sorry.
I'm sorry, I can't understand you. It's been a struggle this whole meeting to hear, honestly, when board members are talking, so I'm kind of getting bits and pieces.
So what I will do then, well, hopefully we can resolve that sound issue, is I will read the statement that Natalie brought forward at the meeting 2 weeks ago. So this statement is in regards to Proposition R. So the statement reads, "The St. Louis Board of Education is opposed to Proposition R in its current form. While the St. Louis Board of Education strongly supports increased funding for early childhood education, Proposition R is a proposal that would divert taxpayer dollars from public schools to non-public entities. In addition, the language of Proposition R is too vague and does not ensure that the $2.3 million raised from taxpayers would directly benefit children in their early years of education. The board strongly believes the best way to fund early childhood education is to increase funding through the state foundation formula, which supports all public schools."
So Proposition R claims to be only a 6 cents per $100 evaluation, but the rate is already 19 cents, and that is a 1/3 increase, which applies across the board, not just to wealthy homeowners in more affluent neighborhoods. My big concern is SLPS is not like Ladue or Afton, where the penalty for not being able to afford your property taxes is just that you owe the government more money and then you get to keep living in your home. In St. Louis City, if you get 3 years behind on your property taxes, you lose your property. It goes either to a private bidder at the sheriff's tax auction, or it goes to the Land Reutilization Authority. And once a property goes to the LRA, it is no longer considered taxable within the district's assessment. It leaves the tax rolls essentially for good, and we have one more homeless person, one more homeless family, or one more homeless student to serve, and now with fewer resources. So given the leftover effects of redlining that have already decimated the north side with unfairly assessed property values, Proposition R is actually perpetuating inequality by extracting more resources from those areas, from the people who already face the highest stakes, and quashing their opportunity to build any generational wealth. It claims to invest in divested areas, but these areas will continue to be divested if we keep taking funds from them, especially for private entities to provide so-called education services with no performance standard or public oversight of their budget. St. Louis Public Schools also provides early childhood education, and we do have performance standards. So we cannot have an equitable education system that we talk about, racial equity lens and all of these things that we promise to our students if we don't stand up and say something against this. We can't have that equitable education until we have equitable taxation. And a 32% tax increase on our lowest income citizens is the antithesis of equitable. So that's my views. I am happy to answer questions or hear from other board members, but it's really important to me that when we're talking about a progressive legislative agenda, that we have to have a voice on this.
That's my views. I am happy to answer questions or hear from other board members, but it's really important to me that when we're talking about a progressive legislative agenda, that we have to have a voice on this.
All right, Natalie, can you hear me? No. It might be a lot to type, but take your best shot. So I have two questions, one question and something else. So the question is just 2 weeks ago when she brought this to our attention, I guess the language was the same. I was under the impression that she was going to be trying to figure out try to understand the vagueness, so those non-public entities, and as well as how much would actually go to K-12 education. So I was just wondering if she has any update on that. The second thing is, while I agree with everything she said about the equity distribution, if this is what we're adopting as language, none of that about equity is in this language. So I'm trying to understand if that's also our stance. Why is that not included in our board stance language?
Second. So, right, so 2 weeks ago, we were going for a short statement rather than a long resolution that would outline everything. Those are my personal feelings. I think it is best to keep it narrow, but I obviously, we did ask for feedback on that statement. And if you would like to see equity included, I think it would be a good time to discuss that if you have a quick statement ready. But the election is coming up, and I feel like it's really important that we come out opposed to this. In my opinion, if that's the will of the board, I think it's important that we take a stance on this before the election so that it is impactful.
And I feel like it's really important that we come out opposed to this. In my opinion, if that's the will of the board, I think it's important that we take a stance on this before the election so that it is impactful.
Ms. Van Noy, can you specify that I am not advocating that the equity statement be included? I'm just saying that in her explanation, she included equity in there, yet it is not in this statement. So I'm just trying to understand the dissonance there. Because if that's what she led with as a reason, but it's not in this statement at all, so is it just not important, or? But I feel like if she's leading with that, then it must be important. So I'm just wondering why it's not included in the statement as is.
So what I would ask for at this time is there a motion to approve the statement that is before us, as that is the matter that we'll be voting on?
I move that we adopt the statement proposed in regards to Proposition R.
Second, are there further questions or discussion? So So I think Natalie answered that. She said that those were her personal feelings as to why it is important, but this statement was written this way to be addressing the aspects of Proposition R. So the item that we're voting on here is the statement that is before us. So if there is a different statement that we should be considering, I think that's an entirely separate conversation. So there has been a motion and a second. Are there further discussion on this statement before us?
Our lobbyist to write this statement in alignment with our legislative agenda. He picked out a couple of bullet points, which was in the documents that he sent out. And he wrote that as a professional lobbyist with a little bit of input from me. I am more of a passionate activist, so if that's what he feels is effective and that's what we pay him to do, I feel like that is, it's probably a good strategy.
I am more of a passionate activist, so if that's what he feels is effective and that's what we do, I feel like that is probably a good strategy.
Is there any further discussion on the motion, which is to vote on the statement before us? Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
No.
Dr. Roberts?
Abstain.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowell?
Yes.
Ms. S. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. The last item on our agenda tonight is intended to just be a brief opportunity for you to share input. I did attempt to collect some of this information via email and only heard back from one board member, so I wanted to provide this as an opportunity to get some feedback on our current meeting format and the way that we have been doing public comment or public participation. So if there's any board members who has some feedback as it pertains to this, I'd love to hear it. So I'll open
I
this.
just have a question. Did you get my email today on feedback regarding this? I sent it to you and Dr. Adams.
So I did get your email. I didn't realize that it was in response to the meeting format. So just essentially like, this was intended to be about in-person versus virtual meetings. Is this location conducive to the meetings that we want to have? Are we fine with the public comment, the way that it has been being submitted in writing ahead of time?
Yeah, I guess my feedback was, I am concerned that maybe those who take the time to write comments may not think we are attentive to those comments. So my feedback was just maybe we need to make some kind of statement on a regular basis and allow us to highlight some of those comments that maybe we have concerns about, or send those to you, and then some formal statement be made about how we are considering some of those things, so that those who are taking time to send us emails or make comments know that we are actively reading those things. So I didn't make, in my email to you guys, I did not point that it's related to this. Maybe I should have done that, but it was kind of to reply to this.
Sure, that makes sense. So prior to the pandemic and switching to written public comment, we did provide a response to, the board secretary would do a response to the people that spoke at our public meetings. So I'll talk to Dr. Adams tomorrow about what way we might do that in the written way.
So I second the comments that Ms. Fowler made. However, I hadn't seen any information as relates to how many people would be able to be let inside the meeting. Did you put that in? I missed it if you did.
No, there has
Okay.
not been any.
Yeah, so I
no.
haven't seen anything like that. So at this time, I don't support it. And again, if there's some way we could acknowledge the public comments on our line, that would be fine. But as this is a volunteer capacity, I don't agree with it, and I think that we should keep it the way that it is right now and try to find a way to highlight the comments, I guess, that our constituents have, or information that they'd like to give us in our meetings.
Hearing no further comment, I'd like to
I
make
have one more.
Oh, sure.
Dr. Adams, I don't know, and I guess Ms. Fano, I don't know what our bandwidth looks like tech-wise, but I have heard from members of the public that it might be ideal, instead of typing and sending their comments, they might want to record audio. And I know we've had before a 2-minute or 3-minute time limit, and maybe we can do that and have them upload clips. Again, I wouldn't say, well, I don't know how long we'll be in this pandemic, but I wouldn't say that we need to create a new infrastructure for it. But if your team knows of or has a way for people who don't want to type or maybe can't type to be able to audio record or video record their public statement and be able to get that to us in some way. Yeah, ahead of time, yeah.
We can look to see if we could get that done. I think, as Ms. Benoit said, it would have to likely be 24 or 48 hours before the meeting, and then play it back and limit it to a certain number, because it might be hundreds. But I can work with staff and then get back with the president in terms of what we might be recommending.
Right. And I did ask about bandwidth because I know that a text file is definitely smaller than an audio or video.
Right.
So, but just in case that was an area of exploration.
Okay. We will look into it.
I move that we adjourn and convene into closed session pursuant to Missouri State Statute 610.021, Section 4, Real Estate.
Second.
Ms. Bell?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Are we going to do committee reports, or are we coming back into open session?
So we don't have committee reports on the agenda tonight since it's a work session.
Okay, got it. Sorry, thanks.
That's okay. Ms. Bell?
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. D. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowell? Ms. Bowell?
Yes?
Ms. S. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Adjourned.